Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Life Lab. I am really excited today to have a wonderful guest. She's an old friend of my family and a big high-profile HR director up in the Northwest in Manchester. She is Sarah Chadbourne. Sarah, welcome to the Life Lab. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for the introduction, Tom.
Good. Right, so we're going to dive straight in because there's lots of things I want to talk to you about today. One of them being your big idea for a book. But before that, let's get into a little bit about you. So tell us a bit about yourself. What's your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So professionally, I've been in HR for 19 years now. And I've spent more than half of that in the technology space, which is really where my passion lies, definitely in that space. And I think in my early career, I spent a lot of time in people operations and kind of really got into a lot of employee relations. So I kind of built all my foundations in people ops and employee relations. And then I would say in the last 10 years or so, really moved into that strategic side of HR. So worked internationally, had tons of experience with mergers and acquisitions and kind of seeing the impact that mergers and acquisitions can have positively and negatively on businesses. And I've just had a great opportunity to work with some fantastic leaders in that time as well. And it's really kind of it's opened my eyes in terms of the importance of leadership development and how leaders impact workplace culture, which is kind of one of the reasons and going to be quite a big factor of the book that I'm thinking of writing.
Excellent. So we'll get on to the book in a little bit, and we'll also come back to those mergers and acquisitions because I think there's a big link, isn't there, with culture, and this is what the book is all about. What about outside work? Who are you outside work? What are your passions? What can people find you doing on a weekend?
Yeah, so I have a little girl. She's 5. So we do loads of family trips, whether it's here in the UK or overseas. We've got a massive bucket list of places that we want to go and visit with her over the next few years. But I'm massively into my fitness, and that kind of changes with seasons, I think. I was a big runner, stopped running,
Oh yeah.
and I'm big into weightlifting. So I always have to have a goal, and that kind of also translates into this book as well. I always have to have something that I'm aiming for, whether it be some sort of personal challenge relating to fitness. So yeah, I always like having something big that I'm aiming for. Keeps me really motivated.
Excellent. And I'm big into fitness as well. I'm sort of at the moment trying to get myself a bit back into running, so I'm going the other way. So I've just hired a running coach and I'm doing some mindset work around running because I think my body can do it. My mind tells me something else. So when it's time to push on, my mind's saying, why don't you just stop and have a rest? So I'm going the other way. So like, what's made you move away a bit from running and into the weightlifting side?
I think I overdid it. I think I did it for too long, ran too far. Loads of great achievements. So I did an ultra marathon about 8 years ago. And then I think just having a child just focused me. And also being a woman in my late 30s, now 40, everybody was telling me that I should start focusing on strength training. So I thought, well, I'll just give it a go. And I've absolutely fallen in love with it. Really, really enjoy it. And I'm one of those people that I'm really explicit about my goals. I'll tell everybody what I'm trying to do because it gives me some personal accountability.
Yeah.
So I've recently lifted a 100k deadlift only last week.
Wow.
And I've told anyone that would listen this year that I was going to do it because that's my way of convincing myself. But interestingly, I've got a friend who's doing the Manchester Marathon in a few weeks and she didn't want to tell anybody that she was doing it in case she didn't do it. And she has now told people she's doing it. But it was a really interesting observation on how people hold themselves accountable because she wanted me to keep it a secret.
Yeah, it's so interesting. A couple of things I would say to that. So when I'm facilitating any sort of team work stuff or even a leadership development program, one of the last things that we always do is make a public commitment to your behaviour change because there's lots of evidence that if you socialise your goals, you are more likely to do them. You're much more likely to hold yourself accountable. And the second thing is like that whole thing that we're all so worried about what other people think. And there's nothing wrong with signing up for a marathon, training for it and not achieving it. It's a big thing to achieve.
Yeah.
But somewhat, but you've got to, nobody else cares if you don't do it.
Yeah.
Everybody else is just going to say, wow, you gave it a good try.
Yeah.
Not, aren't you stupid for failing? So it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether I can. I'm sure I have deadlifted over 100k at some point, but I'm not sure I could do it today. So yeah, all kudos to you for that. Awesome.
Thank you, and kudos to you to getting back into your running.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I've just done, and this is another interesting thing that I'm doing at the moment. So I'm doing some hypnosis around mindset. So I've had a hypnosis session this morning, so I'm feeling really zen. And this is all about like what happens in that moment. And so when you feel like you want to stop, or you feel like you're going to get, because I'm doing it for presence, because I get distracted quite easily. So, what happens to your brain when you're going to get distracted, and what can you do differently? So yeah, it's quite an interesting process, and she's just taught me how to self-hypnotize as well, so that I can do a bit of mindset training on my own. I don't need to have a hypnotherapist to do it. So it's interesting. Anyway, back to you. Too much about me.
I love that.
So tell us then about your idea for a book, because what we're all about on the Life Lab is we're all about trying new things and pushing ourselves to do new things. And there's probably a link to the marathon and the fitness stuff there. So yeah, tell us what's going on with this book.
Yeah. So one thing is I've been telling anyone that will listen that I'm writing a book. And again, it's that kind of accountability. Like if I tell people, I'm going to have to do it.
Yeah.
So the book has been baking, and I say baking rather than brewing, for a while because the book's going to be called Culture Cake. And I've had the idea for a few years, and I've just kept putting it off. Either, I'll write it one day, or maybe I won't write it. And I think at the start of this year, I just made myself a commitment that I would start writing it and see where it goes. I don't have to know what the end goal is going to be. I don't know exactly how the book's going to play out, what it'll mean, where I'll go with it. But I just need to trust the process and actually start the writing process and the research process. So it'll probably help if I explain where I got the concept from.
Yeah.
So back in a previous company, so we're going back kind of 7 years ago, there was an initiative within the company to try and improve kind of customer advocacy and customer experience. And it was all superficial things that we were focusing on. So nice onboarding brochures, maybe a set of cupcakes on the day they become a customer and things like that. But it was really obvious that actually what it was branded as, let's give the customer the pickle. But the big flaw in the whole initiative was that the levels of disadvantage with the sandwich itself and the filling, etc., was huge, and therefore the customers didn't care about the pickle. It was totally missing the point. Now, some of these things, some of the problems with the sandwich, were perhaps outside of the control of the people that were running this initiative, and they were doing what they could. So, it's not to say that what they were trying to do wasn't important. It's just it was missing what the customer wanted, and it almost became laughable, really, in terms of give the customer the pickle. Well, let's start with the sandwich to begin with.
Yeah.
So that's where the idea of the concept kind of came from. But then translating that into workplace culture, the idea is that quite often you find organisations focusing on the superficial side of culture. So what I'm going to be referring to in the book is the icing. So people can make the icing look amazing, and that does happen. It's happened to me in the past as well, where you get presented this very glossy view of an organisation, whether it's through interviews or whether it's through LinkedIn posts, etc. But actually, when you dig in underneath the surface, there perhaps isn't a great cake underneath, or there's things missing. So I think if the cake's half baked, there's missing ingredients, and just proper consideration hasn't been given to the content of the cake, then it really just detracts from the icing. Whereas if you get all the ingredients right, and you can tweak them and fine tune them over time, then it's just going to magnify the impact of the icing. So it's going to make the icing even better if the ingredients of the cake are well thought out and well considered. So that's kind of the premise of the book, is around this concept of the cake being what's really, really important, and the icing being the added extra, rather than the other way around. Let's fix what we can up here, but let's just forget about what's going down on here, because quite often that's the hard stuff that requires a lot of buy-in, it requires a lot of engagement, it's tough to do, and I think that's one of the reasons why it can often get ignored.
Brilliant. Well, so much to dig into there. I suppose just like before we get into that, like how do you feel about becoming a writer?
Scared.
What's
I think
scary
there's
about
like,
it?
well, any kind of like self-doubt creeps in, doesn't it? Which is,
Mm,
I can't write a book. Or the big one is, like, I don't know enough to write a book. And I
yeah.
kind of overcame that hurdle at the end of last year through my coach Amanda, which is quite often you don't need to you don't need to know everything
Mm,
to get started on something. And you even don't need to know everything to be good at something. So I guess the whole idea of this book is it's going to be a lot based on research, but a lot
mm,
based on practical reality. So case studies. I've started interviewing CEOs and people leaders because I don't know everything, and I've only got a limited experience of my working career in HR, and I want to bring other people's perspectives to the book. So I think that's
mm,
what gave me the boost to actually say, do you know what? I don't need to know everything, and I'm never going to know everything on
yeah.
workplace culture to get started. And my idea is I'm going to draw other people's perspectives into the book, but I'm still scared of writing it. It's a big commitment as
Mm,
well, um,
yes. Yeah. I mean,
which you know, having
yeah.
just
I
written
mean,
a book.
you're also taking, you're also taking quite a challenging route to doing it by, I think, by having lots of different voices in there and
Yeah,
how you bring those together. That for me, that for me feels hard. But that's the sort of person probably that I am. I sort of feel like I can do the creative bit. It's like the hard yards bit I would struggle with, and that's why my book had no other sources in it apart from what's in my head, which will probably be to the detriment of the quality of the book.
yeah,
But yeah, it made it easier to write. Well, I can honestly say though it's a good experience to
yes,
to get a book published. It
yeah.
feels good. It feels good. And so like tell us then a little bit about like what you think some of the ingredients are then to great culture and where those ideas have come from.
Yeah. So the idea is that every chapter is going to be an ingredient, and I've thought a couple of different ways of approaching the book, whether it's um, ingredients, as in things like leadership, behaviour, communication, or whether it's concepts like psychological safety and empowerment and belonging. But actually,
Mm.
at the moment, I'm leaning to the idea of it being topics, so like leadership, behaviour, communication, equality and inclusion, well-being, and I think it's going to culminate in a small chapter on employee experience, because actually all of those things create employee experience,
Mm.
which turning creates employee engagement, which in turn then creates business results. So I actually don't think employee experience will have a big chapter on its own, because it's going to be everything else that happens before that is what creates a great employee experience.
Mm.
So those I think are going to be some of the fundamental chapters, things like talent development, but I think something that's already been echoed back to me so far from the research and the interviews that I've already done has especially been around like leadership behaviour and communication. So those have come out really strong already so far. But then I
Mm.
also want to weave these concepts in, so empowerment, trust, psychological safety. I think these are going to be kind of weaved in and out of all the chapters. They're probably like a constant theme that runs throughout the book.
Yeah.
And then other things that I think will come out of the book, and I've already started talking about in the research and interviews, is things like the impact of hybrid and remote working on workplace culture, multi-generational workforces, mergers and
Mm.
acquisitions, which we already mentioned briefly.
Yeah.
So I think there's so much, and also something that only came up this week actually is just the context of the organisation. So where is the organisation at the moment, and what factors might be at play that might
Mm.
impact workplace culture? But if you know what your culture is and you're already able to describe it and define it and monitor it, then you're going to be less impacted by those big shifts, whether it's something macroeconomic or whether it's a business sale or a merger.
Mm.
But if you've got no idea what your culture is, and you've let it emerge and it is just there, and you've got a little understanding of what makes your culture, then you're likely to be much more impacted by those types of events.
Yeah. Like, how do you think leadership and culture are linked? Like, particularly in terms of like, strong leadership, because leadership through difficult times has to be strong. It's not always the
Yeah.
time where you can really, get your arms around people a lot and all that sort of stuff. And I suppose I'm struggling a bit with my question, but it's like, if you have to be strong in your leadership, how do you make sure that doesn't impact your culture in a detrimental way, if you see what I mean?
And I think this is where there's so much connectedness with communication. So, and that kind of willingness to be open and transparent. And naturally, there are some times when it's really difficult to do that. And I think sometimes it's easier to retreat in those difficult times. But actually, those types of situations, I think, can only strengthen culture. So when you're standing there at the front, whether it's a really difficult period and you're making redundancies, but you're owning it, you've been really clear about the reasons why. I think all those things can really strengthen. And I've seen that firsthand, that, being honest and open and transparent, because otherwise people will go away and make up their own stories and versions of events. So I think actually, like, driving into that head first and owning it is a really important leadership behaviour. And I have seen it really work out well.
Yeah. What do you think is like your unique take on culture that will make your book stand out in, what is, let's face it, it's a fairly crowded field, if you like.
Yeah. So I think, the concept, because who doesn't love cake? And I quite like the analogy. Like, the analogy has just really stuck with me, and it's just been in my brain for a couple of years. And I like describing it through the analogy. So I think that in itself is partly what I think, a way that I think it could be accessible. But I think a lot of the content and books and material written on culture is quite theoretical based, or it's quite high level. And the intention, or the way I'm planning to write the book, is that it's more accessible, and that there is some theory and there are some models built into the book, but that it's very much based on interviews and research and real life examples, not of only how people have done it well, but also like what's gone wrong. I'd like to bring that out in the book as well, is like, where did you get it wrong as, CEO, people leader, or, especially for people leaders, like, where didn't you get the buy-in? Like, what did you want to do? And, where weren't you able to get the buy-in, and what was the consequence of that? And for CEOs, like, where have you made mistakes that you think have impacted culture? So I kind of want to show the good, the bad, and the ugly, really, the whole view of like what's the downside of not considering your workplace culture. So making it accessible, making it practical. So the idea is every chapter will be a blend of like theory, models, practical examples, so case studies from different organisations, and similar to your book then, like, what am I actually going to do with this? How is the reader going to apply what they've just learned in that chapter? Because that's how I enjoy reading. I'll read something, I'm like, what am I going to do with this now? How am I going to use this information? So I do want people to be able to take away something quite practical, and almost it be a bit of a blueprint. If someone's going into a new organisation, they've been tasked with evaluating the culture, like, okay, well, what would be the steps to do that in the first place? What qualitative and quantitative data might you want to collect, which will give you an insight into what the culture might be, and how then might you want to consider about getting buy-in from the CEO and the senior leadership team to put in place the initiatives that you might want to put into place, and what things might you want to tackle first. So, and for people to be able to dip in and out of it, so it to be quite bite-sized.
I love the concept. I'm also just thinking about, when we think about culture is an output, right? Like well-being is an output, employee experience is an output. These are all subcategories, I suppose, of what makes your culture, but they are outputs. And it's really, it's the ingredients that you put in, and that's what I think is so captivating about the concept, because I've never made a souffle before, for example, but if you don't get the right consistency of ingredients, and then you don't keep the oven door shut or whatever, then it ain't gonna rise, is it?
No,
you're not
or
get
you open
want.
your oven door halfway through and your cake sinks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, love it. So tell us about as well, like, because this is a podcast experience appearance that you're doing today. You're quite interested in podcasting, aren't you? Tell us a little bit about that. Yes,
I like the idea of at some point turning Culture Cake into a podcast. and each episode being, some sort of interview. And as I'm already doing these interviews now, I met a CEO last week, and I was sat thinking, I wish I was recording this as a podcast, because it was amazing. So I'd like to kind of deliver that in a different way of content, as well as writing it in a book, also having it available for people to listen to through various interviews. So I think at some point I might get to that tipping point in my research where I actually say to someone, as well as recording this for the book, can we record it as a podcast? So, yeah.
Brilliant. And how do you feel about starting a podcast?
Scared. Again.
It's a theme here.
No, but I think there's nothing, you have to feel uncomfortable about these things, don't you? Well, I think it's pretty normal to feel uncomfortable about these things, because I've never done one, so I'm naturally going to feel a bit nervous about doing it. So yeah, I feel a little bit nervous, but I love, just like now we're doing, it's very conversational, and one of the recent interviews I did last week, it was very conversational, so it just felt really natural. It flowed really lovely. So that gives me a bit of confidence that it doesn't have to be super scripted and super formal.
I mean, I think that one of the reasons that I really like listening to podcasts is because they are conversational. It's almost like just sort of eavesdropping on a conversation. That's often quite focused on really interesting subjects. But I understand you being scared. Like when I first started Beyond Potential, the podcast, with my friend and colleague Tom Mason, which we're still doing today, and we really enjoy doing it. We were so terrified at the beginning. We felt so weird and so awkward doing these intros and outros, and it was so it just felt so false, even though it was quite conversational. But now we just the mic goes on and we just dive in and we love it. And it just gets easier over time. So which brings me back to, I suppose, the point I was getting at with this, which is that you've got to try new things. Things that are scary generally are the things that are the most enjoyable once you get going, and the most satisfying.
There's a great quote in Robin Sharma's book. I think it's in The Wealth That Money Can't Buy, and I think it's something like, if it feels comfortable, you're not going fast enough. So
definitely resonates with me. Which is also back to the running analogy in some ways as well. So, what do you think that people listening to this could take as practical tips about how you're approaching life, your professional life, doing a book? What do you think you could take away from this?
There's no better. When I first started thinking about that, I was actually going to write this book back in November. I think the first thing I wrote at the top of my page was, there's no better place to start than to just start, because you can put off so much. There can be so much inaction, which is disguised as thinking about doing something. And I think that's where I've been for the last couple of years, is thinking about doing something. So I wrote, I'm starting writing my book. And I think I'd read that somewhere in terms of just the best place to start is to just start. So I think that applies to anything, isn't it? Anything that you might be putting off, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be, or it's never as scary as you think it's going to be. So, start. And then we were talking about at the beginning as well, tell people you're doing it. So I didn't tell anyone for the first couple of months, and then I got brave enough at the start of this year to start saying to people, cause I don't work on Fridays, so people have been asking me, oh, what do you do on your Fridays? I've been, I'm writing a book. Oh, what book are you writing? And then that just leads into conversation. And the more I've then started talking about it, the more I've become convinced that it's the right thing to do, the more confident I've become in the concept, and in being able to articulate it. So I think, externalizing it for me has helped, but that helps in all things, especially goals. Anything that I'm trying to do, I will always tell people that I'm doing it.
Excellent.
I think I've become a bit of a bore.
I'm sure, never. Well, look, I can't wait to read it. And I can't wait to hear your podcast. I think you're a real natural on podcasts.
Thanks, Tom.
So I've really enjoyed chatting to you today, and I love that. I actually literally recorded a very short form podcast about a few days ago that was called "It's Time to Stop Buying the Gym Kit and Go to the Gym." And it was basically this idea that you can keep preparing and preparing, and you can buy new trainers and you can get the fancy gym membership, and you can buy yourself a nice leopard print leotard or whatever it is. But at some point, you are going to have to like get down the gym and do some work. So I think, just start it. Just do a bit. Yeah. Excellent. Well, lovely to talk to you. Thank you again for your appearance. And I'm waiting to see what happens with you next.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for your support.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.